Renting a flat in London, understanding all the documents that you need to secure a flat here in the UK can become quite confusing, especially if you're an expat. Now, towards the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what paperwork you need to secure your next UK home. Do make sure you stay to the end, because I'm also going to be sharing with you all the legal documents that your landlord or agent should provide you with towards the beginning of the tenancy. So stay tuned. When renting a flat here in London, there are certain documents that you're going to need and certain references that you're going to have to pass, and that can become quite complex, especially if your application is coming from overseas. And that's going to be because as an overseas applicant, you're not necessarily going to be able to prove all your documents, and you're not going to be able to meet all the criteria, because after all, you haven't lived here in the UK, so you haven't got a proof of the UK residence. You haven't got credit checks here from the UK. So what do? Well, assuming you're unemployed, the agent or the landlord is going to want some type of security. And generally that's going to come in the form of 6 months rent paid in advance, or sometimes even 12 months, or a UK guarantor, which will break down what that means further down the video. So with that said, let's dive into the documents that you'll typically need to show an agent or a landlord. So first up is going to be your proof of ID. Generally this is going to be a passport. Sometimes other IDs will also be acceptable. The second one is going to be proof of address, and normally this can be a utility bill, some type of tax statement, or even a bank statement will usually be suffice. Third is your right to rent checks, and this is the proof that you can actually live here in the UK. Usually this is done in person. You drop into the agent's office, but also in the last couple of years during COVID, it's been allowed to be done online, in which you just put your passport, visa next to your face whilst you're on a video call, just to prove that you do have that evidence to reside here in the UK. Fourth is your credit checks, and this is where a company does some background references as to your financial status. So they'll be looking at what your financial status is now and whether you've had any previous CCJs and bankruptcies. Fifth is your employment referencing. Now usually the referencing company doesn't accept it directly from you, so if you have a signed contract, it's not that you just provide this to them. No, they will need to get in contact with your employer. They'll ask for a signed contract, but they'll also ask for a letter confirming your employment. In addition to that, they may also ask for 3 months bank statements and 3 months pay slips, so they can actually cross-reference everything and make sure everything is in alignment. And if you're finding this video helpful, hit that like button so we can push out more of these videos out to expats just like you. So a lot of expats say to me, hey Danny, but I don't start my job until a couple of months' time and I'm moving from the US. And that's absolutely fine. As long as you have a signed contract, then a future employer is absolutely fine. The referencing company will just confirm with the employer that everything's signed and dusted, however, that it isn't subject or conditional to other aspects, sort of background checks or anything like that, because then it won't be approved. It'll actually be declined. So a signed contract, an unconditional signed contract would be absolutely fine to get an approval. And 6 is previous landlord referencing. And this is to prove that you have paid your full rent in the past, but also you're not a problematic tenant. Now, if you haven't lived in the UK, that doesn't matter. The referencing agency can reach out to landlords overseas, and usually if they can't reach out to anyone, what they can do also, if you can provide them with a previous tenancy agreement and also show them with a bank statement that you've paid all your rent on time and in full as well, and they'll cross-reference that with your tenancy agreement from whatever part of the world that you're at. Now, if you've had your fair share of experience as a tenant, be it here in the UK or anywhere in the world, please leave a comment here and share your story or your thoughts on the process and systems that we have here in the UK. Now, once the referencing has been approved, you're now all ready to sign the tenancy agreement. Now, this is a legal document, so make sure you read it very carefully, or if you have any doubts, reach out to the Citizen Advice Bureau for any support that you may need. There are some clauses you should be looking out for. The first thing is the period of time that you're signing the tenancy agreement for. Usually this is 12 months. If you require a 6-month break clause and it's been agreed, make sure you check whether this is a flexible or a fixed break clause. What I mean by this is a fixed break clause means that you can break the clause only at that time that's been agreed. If you miss that period, then that's it. You're going to have to honor the whole agreement. A flexible means that after that period, for example 6 months, then you could give notice at any one time. Usually the notice period is going to be around about 2 months. Bills, The reality is that most bills will be the tenant's responsibility, not the landlord's. But you can check that, and that should be negotiated at the very beginning. The deposits are pretty much standard. It's always going to be around about 5 weeks. It's illegal to charge any more than 5 weeks, especially with an AST for less than £100,000 rental for the year. That now brings us to maintenance, whether it's managed by the agency or it's managed by the landlord themselves. Usually this is the responsibility of the landlord, but do check that on the tenancy agreement as well. Usually the notice period is going to be 2 months, and if it rolls over to a periodic statutory tenancy, also known as a rolling basis, then usually it's a month notice for the tenants, but 2 months notice for the landlord. Now when it comes to fees, it's pretty standard. Here in the UK, since the 2019 Tenant Act, the landlord or the agent can't charge you absolutely pretty much any fees. Unless you're going to want to terminate the contract, then there is a different agreement made between you and the landlord can charge you what's not seen as a fee, but more so as a compensation. But do make sure you read more about that. If you want to find out more as to what to consider as an expat when renting a property here in London, make sure you check out our other videos, which is part of our How to Rent in London series. This includes on things what you should be considering before you even start searching for a property, but also how to make an offer in a competitive rental market in London. So when it comes to inventory checks, the landlord's the ones that's responsible to pay for an inventory clerk if they are actually paying for a clerk, which we always recommend. However, they're not legally obligated to pay. They can actually do it themselves, a kind of DIY document. And whether it's a professional one or DIY, make sure you look for it thoroughly, especially if they've done a DIY one, and just make sure you're in agreement and you have had the opportunity to check it before you sign on the dotted line. And finally, and in no particular order, I'm going to share with you the documents that your agent or landlord should be sharing with you. Firstly is the EPC, which is the Energy Performance Certificate, which should be displayed with all the marketing details to begin with. Secondly, the How to Rent Guide, which is the UK government guideline for you as a tenant to educate yourself as to what you should expect. Third certificate, the gas safety, if there is of course any gas in the flat. Fourth, you got your electrical, which will come as a form of the EICR, which is valid for around about 5 years. Fifth, you got your AST, so once the tenancy has been signed, you should be provided with a copy of the same. And then sixth, you have your evidence of the deposit monies. So you can have proof that has been registered with one of the 3 major schemes, and you know how you're going to be able to claim that back towards the end of the tenancy. So the fact that you need to provide a huge amount of paperwork, whether you're the landlord renting the property or whether you are the tenant making an application, makes you absolutely realize that you should subscribe to this channel so you can keep up to date with everything property and everything London.